In typical fashion and form for the Judiciary Committee this legislative session, we heard bipartisan bills. Most of the bills passed. We did have one that failed today, and that would only be the second bill that we have failed to pass out of committee this entire session. The first one I'll talk about is Senate Bill 1378 by Representative McCall. This has to do with modifying certain excess sums in condemnation proceedings. We've seen lots of different condemnation and type of property forfeiture types of legislation. This simply talks about the liability that a lien holder would have, typically a bank, credit union, something like that, to a mortgager when the amount of the commissioner's award or the amount received at a jury trial is in excess of what is owed on the property, and just make sure that the lien holder is only responsible to the mortgager or the property owner for the difference between the award and the sum that was actually given. That passed on a vote of 7-1. The next bill, Senate Bill 1250, passed on a vote of 8-0 by Representative Elise Hall of the House and again Senator Jolly of the Senate, and that has to do with modifying our electronic notary statutes. Again, this is something that's become more common as we go further into the digital age, and I know she's working with Secretary of State Chris Benj to make sure that we have proper legislation and statutes as it applies to notary public and electronic notaries. The third bill, Senate Bill 58, passed on a 5-2 vote, and that was by Representative Billy, Assistant Floor Leader Lisa Billy of the House and Kim David of the Senate. This has to do with the impaired driving of motor vehicles. Again, this is similar to statutes that we have passed, and just making sure that when we're talking about municipal charges, that if they're of a certain level, then they are actually reported to county so that we can make sure courts of record are keeping track of these types of drunk driving offenses, because the last thing that we want is somebody who has multiple offenses that may have occurred at a municipal level being not reported statewide. That passed 5-2. The next bill was Senate Bill 441 by Representative Virgin from Norman and Senator Sparks, also from Norman. They're both Democrat authors. And this has to do with institutions of higher education and making sure that we had certain causes of action if there's an outside party that causes that university or institute of higher education to be hit because of violations for the NCAA, things like that. Right now, there's really no cause of action that the institution can bring for being found guilty of violations of that governing body against a third party that may have been the cause of that. And of course, we've seen several instances of that on a statewide, or I should say a nationwide level. And so this is similar to legislation that was passed by Representative Todd Thompson earlier this year. This is kind of a I would say a more broad and less wordy version of that, and so I expect that we'll probably see something in conference committee. That passed on a 6-1 vote. The next bill was by Senator Sykes of the Senate, Representative Lee Denny of the House, Senate Bill 796. This has to do with the liens that are on property, usually vehicles that are towed or taken into impound, and this was something that took 2 years actually working with wreckers and salvage yards and things like that, and credit unions, banks, lien holders, to make sure that we had legislation that everyone could agree with. The most important thing to me here, and I was involved in a lot of the negotiations back and forth, is to make sure that we're protecting consumers and that they know when their property has been taken into impound, that they receive proper notice so they can get that property out, and especially before it's sold. That passed on a vote 7-1. The final bill is the one that failed. That was presented by Representative Kevin Calvey of the House, Senator Smalley, Senate Bill 231, and this has to do with binding arbitration agreements that relate to nursing homes and extended care facilities and things like that. There have been some issues in the past about the enforceability of arbitration agreements that many persons sign when they go into this type of care. If something happens, do they actually have a right to go to court at a district court level and plead their case to a jury, or is arbitration agreements that are often included in those contracts binding? That failed on a vote from 2-5. So that is the work of the House Judiciary Committee for this cycle. As always, appreciate you being here and look forward to seeing you in the coming weeks.